So hi, welcome. Thanks so much for coming, everyone, for this discussion on ranked choice voting. My name is Sabrina Laverty. I'm a research analyst at FairVote, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator today for this panel discussion. Today we gather with the support of two influential organizations, FairVote and Black Voters Matter, to explore how ranked choice voting can help shape a more representative and equitable electoral system. So as some of you may know, DC voters will be going to the polls in November and will likely be voting on the RCV ballot initiative known as Initiative 83. If successful, it would open Washington, D.C.'s closed primaries to independent voters and implement ranked choice voting in the nation's capital. Our esteemed panelists, who are experts in their respective fields, bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. Each panelist offers a unique perspective on the implications of ranked choice voting, and so I'm going to introduce them. We have Lisa D.T. Rice. She is the proposer of Initiative 83. She is currently a Unite America board member, an open primary spokesperson, a DC state leader of Veterans for All Voters, and the vice chair of the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship Board of Directors. A native Washingtonian, Lisa is an elected local official and serves her community as an advisory neighborhood commissioner. We also have Vinay Orekondy. Vinay serves as the coalition's director and national organizer at Rank the Vote, an organization focused on election reform and also ranked choice voting. And more recently, Vinay was named the campaign manager for Initiative 83. He is originally from Australia, and he has been involved in various different political and advocacy initiatives, including co-founding the Australian Progressives and running as a candidate for the Keep Sydney Open Party in 2019 New South Wales elections. And we also have Deb Otis. She is the Director of Research and Policy at FairVote with a decade of experience in research and analytics. Deb is passionate about sharing the data-driven case for why our country needs election reform. And we were supposed to have another panelist, but unfortunately some things came up and she could not come. But her name is Rhyane Wagner, and we'll see a message from her later on. But just to introduce her, Rhyane Wagner is the National Policy Manager for Black Voters Matter. She has 15 years of electoral and social justice experience in the Deep South. She previously served as the Florida Senior State Organizing Manager for Black Voters Matter. So yeah, now that you know our panelists, we can get started. And just a note to our panelists, this is a conversation, so I encourage you all to talk to each other, build off of what you all say and things like that. So with that, are we ready? Okay, great. Okay, so my first question is actually for you, Deb. For anyone in the room who doesn't know what ranked choice voting is, can you explain it?
Absolutely. What is ranked choice voting? Can we do a quick show of hands in the room? Who has heard of it before today or knows a little something about it? See some, but not everyone. Okay, it's a good place to start. So ranked choice voting just means voters have the option to rank the candidates on the ballot instead of picking just one. If you happen to grab any of the handouts, they include a sample ballot. So voters get to rank a first choice and a second choice and a third choice. This gives voters more choice. It can encourage more candidates to run without fear of splitting the vote, which leads to more diversity on the ballot and in elected office. Right now, our elections work just fine if there are just two candidates. But as soon as a third or fourth candidate enters, there's talk of vote splitting and spoiling. We hear this about the presidential race all the time. Like if a third party candidate runs, are they just going to split the vote, effectively take votes away from one of the major party candidates, and then maybe throw the election to another candidate? That only happens because we're using a bad election system. We're using a system that elects the person with the most votes, even if that's less than half. In this representative democracy, that 50% should be the lowest bar. If people want to represent us, they should have majority support, not just one more vote than the other person. We elect a lot of people with 30% or 40% support. meaning most voters voted against them. And so with ranked choice voting, it's a majority system, meaning you got to get 50% or more. So that encourages positive campaigning. It encourages reaching out to more voters and bringing in communities of voters that previously weren't listened to because you need their votes. So how are the ballots counted? It's simple. First, your ballot just counts for your first choice. First choice only. If there's a majority already, then that person wins and it's over. If not, that's why you need ranked choice voting. Sometimes there's no majority. So you eliminate the last place candidate. If you voted for that person as your top choice, your vote counts for your second choice instead. It happens automatically because you already marked on your ballot, my top choice doesn't make it, who's my backup choice? And so that's it. Voters get to vote honestly on the ballot. You don't have to worry about voting strategically, making sure you don't throw your vote away by voting for a candidate who doesn't have a chance. You just rank your honest preferences on the ballot, and your vote will count for a candidate, your vote will count meaningfully towards the final result, and we get candidates with broad support who have campaigned to a broader group of voters winning office.
Thank you so much. So now that you all know a little bit about ranked choice voting, I'd like actually to turn it over to Lisa. If you could walk us through Initiative 83 a little bit and talk to us about what open primaries are.
Yeah, I'll do that. But first I want to find out something about you. So if you are age 18 or above, would you raise your hands? Higher, thank you. If you are leave them up. If you are registered to vote, leave your hands up. Okay.
Nice.
And if you know who represents you in the US Congress, leave your hands up. All right, it's okay. It's all right, it's all right. We can take our hands down. It's okay. Thank you. So I did that because a lot of times I speak with students, college students, and we talk about voting and we talk about representation. And a lot of times I hear, I don't vote because they don't represent me. And my answer to that is, whether you vote or not, they represent you. So let's start there. And as was said in the beginning, I am the proposer of Initiative 83, which is a ballot initiative here in Washington, D.C. to open the primaries to independent voters and to implement ranked choice voting in our primaries and general elections. And those are two very separate things. One is about access for people whose votes are suppressed. For those of us, and I'm one of the 1 in 6 DC residents who's registered as an independent or an unaffiliated voter. I'm not registered with any party. My vote is suppressed. I am not allowed to participate in the primary election here in DC. It's a taxpayer-funded election, and I should be, as should everyone else. So part of this initiative is about ballot access and pushing back on DC voter suppression. The other part of it is about what kind of tool are we going to use in order to make politicians more accountable to us. And one of the things that I think, and I'm sort of a latent political scientist, but not really, but one of the things I know is that the more people who vote for someone, then the more accountable that person feels when they're in office. And so what ranked choice voting does is put people in office who have been elected by at least 50% of the voters. And so it's a 1-2 punch, Initiative 83. It's about access for those whose votes are being suppressed as independents, and it's about getting politicians elected who are accountable to the majority. And I don't know what it's like where you're registered to vote, and I'm sure you're from all over the country, but here in DC, we have 13 members on our city council. Of those 13, the last time they were elected, only 3 were elected in the primary, which is the election in DC, by more than 50% of the vote. So it's a problem to be solved. A lot of times you'll hear this is a solution looking for a problem. No, we have the problem in DC and we're trying to solve it with this initiative. So that's at a high level. I don't want to get into too much nitty-gritty from the beginning, but I know because we go into the community and talk about opening primaries. A lot of people don't know what that means, but many of you will. If you're from California or other places, when you register to vote, you don't even register with a party. And I also know that most people age 18 to 25 aren't registering with parties. So you're of the age group where you are the rule, not the exception. When I registered to vote 1,000 years ago, I registered to vote with a party because that's what my parents did. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, I don't know, whenever it was, I decided to divorce myself from the party and declare my independence. What I didn't realize at that time was that I then shut myself out from the most important election in DC, the primary election. But I still stand as an independent because this is a taxpayer-funded election, and what's happened in DC and some other places is the parties basically have started directing who gets to vote, and that is absolutely unfair. So that's a little bit about Initiative 83. And did I stay within my time?
I just wanted to emphasize a point that Lisa just made. 50% of Gen Z voters are not registering with a party. Think about that for a moment. And without open primaries, that means that 50% of Gen Z voters are effectively not able to vote, right? That's an outrageous situation. I think that's what Initiative 83 is looking to correct.
Yeah, and you'll hear different jargon. You'll hear open primaries, you'll hear semi-closed, you'll hear semi-open. A fully open primary is not possible in DC because of our home rule charter. We must have partisan primaries, and so what we want to do, some people will call it semi-closed, some people call it semi-open. And our initiatives really explains it. Opening the primaries to independent voters. So those of us who aren't affiliated with a party, in advance of the primary election, we would say which party's ballot we want, and we would vote in the primary on that ballot. But there are other places that have fully open primaries. No one's registered with a party, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, I've never had that much fun because I'm a DC native, and even though I shouldn't say I haven't had a lot of fun, and I've lived in fun places, but I've always come back to DC to vote. So, but I've seen a lot of different systems. New Orleans, I went to school in New Orleans. I went to school in Boston. I lived in New York, so I've seen a lot of different systems. But I'm a Washingtonian. I live here. I live in the house I grew up in. Come on now.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. And I'm glad that you started mentioning some other places that you've been, because ranked choice voting has actually become the fastest growing nonpartisan voting reform in the nation. It's grown from about 10 cities to 50 cities, counties, and states since 2016. It's won in the last 27 cities where it's been on the ballot. And so my question for all of you, why is RCV growing so fast?
People like it. This all started in like a couple of cities in California 20 years ago, and it started spreading fast. We get these pockets in the country where one city starts using it, and then all of their neighbors start opting in too, because it's solving problems, and people who have used it like it, and they want to keep it. I'd say it's the simple reason why it's spreading. People want to keep it.
And I'll add to that is that it's been tried and tested overseas as well. So in my native Australia, we've had ranked choice voting for 100 years, and it's safe to say that our politics is much better for it, right? We don't have the kind of toxic politics that results from a first past the post system, because when candidates talk to each other, I imagine we'll get into this later, but when candidates talk to each other, they need the other person's voters to rank them second or third, right? So that kind of destructive politics that is so normal here just doesn't happen in Australia. Candidates are nice to each other. Yes, they'll compete, but they won't try and go scorched earth on the other side, because ranked choice voting disincentivizes that sort of behavior.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'd like to transition the conversation now a little bit to the intersection of voting rights and ranked choice voting, and I am going to play this video, a couple questions that I asked our panelists who unfortunately couldn't be here, Rhyane Wagner, and so we'll see a little bit from her now.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks so much for meeting with me.
and taking the time to record this. We're really sad to not have you in person at Howard, but we're really glad that you could appear virtually and share your thoughts on ranked choice voting.
That I'm missing the panel as well. And hopefully next time we're able to do something on HBCU campus, I will be able to join you in person.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple questions for you today. My first question, which is a two-part question, is how does ranked choice voting intersect with the broader conversation about voting rights? And what role can it play in ensuring equal access to the democratic process?
So the first part of that question, I will give some context to how we got here. Since Shelby v. Holder's Supreme Court case, and even the Bronovich case, which um, came down, I think, in 2021, Bronovich case, that is. Shelby v. Holder, I believe, was 2013. There's been this concerted effort over the last decade plus to gut the Voting Rights Act. Any quick research on Justice John Roberts will show that he has always had this in his plans to gut the Voting Rights Act and this idea of race neutrality, even in our redistricting, even in the redistricting space, is harmful to overall voter access, especially with the new maps coming down in states like North Carolina, redistricting advice like Louisiana, the victory we got out of the Supreme Court in Allen v. Milligan. So it's just an all-out assault on voting rights that didn't start last year. It didn't start, when Donald Trump was elected president. This has been at least a decades-long dismantling of some of our foundational core legislation that Black folks worked very hard for. And so there's this trend happening of the overturning of legislative precedent, especially that impacts marginalized communities directly. So the second part of your question, ranked choice voting is a alternative form of democracy. Proportional representation is also one of those things that I think would be beneficial to the United States as a whole in terms of our democratic process on our road to freer and fairer, equitable elections, right? In many states, Georgia in particular, the runoff process was intentionally put in place to keep out Black folks. So, and then in other states, close primary states, the runoff, when other candidates have wanted to run for office, on the Democratic side, you had Democrats basically doing all that they can to discourage Black and brown candidates from running from office because of so-called fears of electability, right? So I think ranked choice voting will help us move beyond those simplistic narratives. It'll give Black people more options because you and I both know all skin folk ain't kinfolk, as the saying goes. Daniel Cameron and Clarence Thomas have proven themselves in the past to have not been for the needs and issues affecting Black folks. So the quality of candidate is key here too. Representation is not enough, even in now, right? Because just because someone is Black doesn't mean that they are also putting the needs of our communities at the forefront. So ranked choice voting will open up the playing field for more quality candidates. It's not just for Black voters, it's for other marginalized communities where there's not this silly narrative around the lesser of two evils. Well, you don't have to worry about that when you have options in terms of who to select to represent you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I am really glad that you brought up Georgia and some other examples. As the senior policy manager at BVM, You obviously have a lot of knowledge of what's happening in different parts of the country with voting rights issues. And I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about some of those examples, in addition to Georgia, some other examples too of why you think ranked choice voting is needed.
So across the South and a lot of these Southern legislatures, you are seeing state level attacks on voting rights. Removal of drop boxes, things that were so convenient during the pandemic for voters, expansion of access to meet the needs. You had over 150 million people turn out to vote because of those additional voter access avenues that were convenient for folks. People like convenience, right? They don't like to have to wait in long lines or wait in the heat if it's a primary in August in Georgia, right? They want to be able to do what's most convenient because not everybody can take the time off from work. All of those things kind of factor in a person's ability to go vote. You have attacks on your ballot challenges coming up from right wingers, right? Omnibus voter suppression bills like SB 747 in North Carolina. You have changes to the early voting times. So it's all out assault on people's ability to go vote efficiently and within the time frame set forth by those state laws, right? You have in Florida, there's a bill on the floor where leadership, the Governor DeSantis administration and his party are trying to also eliminate vote by mail in the state of Florida. We had in Florida one of the quickest vote by mail processes prior to his assaults on voting rights in the state, which aren't limited to bans on vote by mail, right? He instituted an election police force, which if you're Black in Florida, law enforcement come on, right? You're going to also involve law enforcement to prevent so-called voter fraud. And so there are all these other aspects of voting that we have to worry about now. The interruption of the certification process with canvassing boards. It's just a lot. So I think ranked choice voting is one of those solutions. It's not a cure-all to our overall voting issues. I also believe that we should be implementing state versions of the Voting Rights Act that go even further, that have language justice elements involved. Basically codifying what we're supposed to have at the federal level, at the state level, because it's not just enough to implement a new system. Because I also believe that just because you've done something one way for however long our country has been a country, right, been a democracy, that doesn't mean that we can't improve and evolve in terms of our democratic processes and have alternative forms of democracy and really radically reimagine how we view our system of government that's equitable and accessible. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. Yeah. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for being here and for Black Voters Matter partnering with us on this event. This is definitely not the end of the conversation whatsoever. And we hope to hear a little bit more from our other panelists on some of the great things that you said, and can keep the conversation going with students, professors, and the likes. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do any of you have any comments on any things that Rhyane shared?
Oh, I wish you were here.
Same.
One of the things that I do besides this local initiative, I sit on the board of Unite America, which is an organization which is trying to and is a player in bringing democracy to the country. And when Rhyane mentioned the ballot boxes, that was something that we were involved in 2020. At that time, there were 17 states that did not have a process for vote from home. And those things, along with independent redistricting, ranked choice voting, opening primaries, those are the kinds of things that I advise on a national level. I saw the need here in DC when there was a group of democracy reformers right here in my hometown that have been trying to get ranked choice voting through the city council with a legislative process. One of the council members, who is chair of the committee where that legislation would pass through, refuses to hear it. And so that is why we are now adopting the ballot initiative process. Why did we add on open primaries? Because I had already said that as an individual, on primary day 2024, I would be at voting sites with a sandwich board that said, "I can't vote, ask me why." And so there was a marriage that took place about a year ago between me and the folks who were pushing the RCV legislation. It's really, really important. My mother's from Southern Virginia, and her sisters were telling me a few years ago about things that you only read about in history books, or maybe your grandparents have told you, but the kinds of things that were done to Black people at the polls. You have to count these jelly beans, and I was like, that's just such bullshit. And my aunt said, no. I had to count marbles, so that kind of stuff is, well, not count them, but like guess what the number was. That kind of stuff, when the 1964 Voting Rights Act came along, got rid of that, protected us at a federal level. And what Rhyane was talking about in that video is a systemic ridding of the rights that were gained during 64 and 65 with the Voting Rights Act. And so we have to take it on ourselves in our cities, in our states, to rebuild those protections. And I will tell you that it doesn't matter if it's a supermajority Democratic town or city or state, or a supermajority Republican city, town, or state. The fight is the same, the arguments are the same, so it's about the power that the parties hold. And so I urge you to learn as much as you can about voting, how to vote, about the electoral process. You may or may not agree that ranked choice voting is the best tool. There are a lot of tools out there, but it's one that's well understood, and it's something that gets us from where we are today. So I don't even know if that was a question you asked, but that's how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to something that Rhyane mentioned, which is she talked about Georgia. I'm sure all of you, being people who follow politics, have every couple of years the fate of the Senate relies on a Georgia runoff, right? So if ranked choice voting was in place, that wouldn't be an issue, right? So it's sometimes called instant runoff voting because it incorporates the runoff component into when people go to vote. Now, think about it, not only from a time perspective, asking people an entire state or to come in a second time, right? How many people can afford to do that, right? Or have the time to do that? How much is that going to cost the state? Millions and millions of dollars, right? To run a second election and to do that every few years. So thankfully in DC we don't have the runoff problem, but around the country this is one of the reasons why ranked choice voting is gaining popularity, because it just makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now that we've heard, a little bit about why we need ranked choice voting, I'd like to discuss actually a new report that FairVote published recently on ranked choice voting and communities of color. So Deb, can you tell us a little bit about that research?
Absolutely, and Sabrina, you're being very modest. Sabrina and I co-authored this report, so it's your report, not a report. Yes, so at FairVote, we have seen a lot of research showing that women and candidates of color do better under ranked choice voting. They're more likely to win if you're using ranked choice voting. And so we wanted to understand why. Like, what are the mechanisms that are creating more paths for success and that are helping communities build power with ranked choice voting? And so that's what we've been diving into. Some of the factors that we found are really important. One, removing the vote splitting effect. In elections right now, sometimes if you have, say, a Black woman candidate in the race already, if there's another Black woman candidate who wants to run, she might be told, it's not the right time. You might just split votes because you're going to appeal to the same community, which one, can be condescending, it might also be true, but candidates get told, sit down and wait your turn. It's someone else's turn right now. You shouldn't run. You'll only hurt your own community. We see this a lot. With ranked choice voting, that dynamic is gone. If a candidate wants to go out and run and connect with voters, they can do it without hurting other candidates who might appeal to similar voters. Voters who like both candidates will rank one of them first and one of them second. And so whichever of them kind of gets more support is the one who can win. It's not this shadow kind of primary that's happening beforehand to determine who's even allowed to show up on the ballot. So this lack of vote splitting is a big one. Another reason is the positive campaigning. I think both Vinay and Lisa have spoken about this. With ranked choice voting, you have less incentive to really go negative on your opponents. And when races get really negative, sometimes that can be particularly targeted towards candidates of color and women who might be hit with, yes, always might be hit with arguments about their likability or appearance, things that go way beyond the issues that feel very targeted for race or gender. Creating a more positive campaign environment where people are connecting with the voters on the issues is a great way to help newcomer candidates and candidates from underrepresented groups succeed and rise to the top.
Awesome.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Not only does it disincentivize a negative campaign, it actually strongly rewards coalition building. So, for example, if in the example that Deb gave of, a candidate in the current system is told to wait their turn. If you have two candidates running that might appeal to the same community, but they will also draw in different people, right? They'll appeal to different interests, perhaps on a policy grounds or for whatever reason. And if they've built a coalition with each other, they can recommend to their voters, hey, obviously vote 1 for me, right? But vote 2 for this other candidate. So what they're actually doing is increasing the pie, right? So they're actually helping each other out. So those who have figured it out, and this is very normal in Australia. It's a very, very normal part of our political system there, is to build these coalitions. But as ranked choice voting gains traction here, I think candidates are starting to figure that out, and that you are highly, highly rewarded by positive behavior and by negotiating with other candidates to support one another based on shared values, shared policies, or anything like that.
One example of the whole wait your turn and how does ranked choice voting sort of help someone who's been told to wait their turn is what happened in Alaska recently. The person in the U.S. House who had been there for however long Alaska, when did Alaska come into the Union? Someone, quick. 1959? Something like that? Okay, so the guy who had been in the House forever died, and so there was going to be a special election, and it was going to be the first time that ranked choice voting was used. The Democratic Party, so the Republicans knew who they were going to run. The Democratic Party told Mary Peltola, who's an indigenous woman, that she had to wait her turn. She's like, you know what? It's ranked choice voting. Screw that. I'm running. She talked to Alaskans across the state, found the issue that most people were concerned about. Fish was the issue. So if you follow that campaign, everything that Mary Peltola put out was about fish, fish, fish. When she talked to people, she asked them, I'd like your vote, and if you don't want to vote for me, I'd like your second vote. Put me in second. She had these conversations across the state. And here's a woman, an indigenous woman, who was told to wait her turn because the white men had that seat and were going to keep that seat. She went out and campaigned in a way that people hadn't done before. She won the special election, and she came right back and won that seat for the next 2 years. That is such a clear example of how ranked choice voting works for the person who is told it's not your turn. And she didn't believe it, and she went out and campaigned. She is one of my heroes because she just did not accept it's not my turn. So that's a great example. I don't know if you've studied that election, but I encourage you to, there's some things on YouTube, and there's a lot that's been written about both the special election and then the regular election that followed very closely. On the heels of that, I encourage you to learn Mary Peltola's story, because she was definitely told, not your turn.
I love that election too. And there was some negativity. You know, I talk about, it's positive campaigning because of ranked choice. And that's not, this doesn't mean all of a sudden everyone's going to play nice. No. There was some negative campaigning in this race Lisa talks about. This was the race that had Sarah Palin in it. Sarah Palin ended up not winning this race because Mary Peltola won. And Sarah Palin went a little negative on some of her opponents and against ranked choice voting, to be honest. But she was not rewarded for that negativity. The candidate who spoke to broad issues that were important to Alaska voters stayed focused on the issues instead of the mudslinging. She was the one who won.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, thank you. I have a follow-up question actually for you all. Hearing all of this, how do you all think that ranked choice voting will impact representation in the district?
Well, should ranked choice voting become the way we vote, we will have 13 people who represent us that have been elected by the majority. As I said, because it's a super majority Democratic town, the primary is the only election that matters for all but 2 seats on the council in DC. So for those other 11 seats, and as I said before, there were 3 people, only 3 who got the majority in the primary. So it'll be a radical change, because we actually will be represented by people that the majority of us, whether that's across the city for an at-large race or within the ward for a single ward council member race, we'll have someone who advances to the general that's been put in by a majority of the voters. So it'll be wonderfully radical. I can't wait. And I'm in a ward, I live in Ward 7, which the folks are collecting their petitions right now to try to get on the ballot, but there are right now 14 people who want to run for that seat. I believe March 6th is their deadline for if they have enough signatures and will qualify for the ballot, so we'll see how many. But you figure out of 14, probably, I don't know, 8, 9 will land.
Someone could win with 20%.
Someone will win with 20%. Someone will win with 20%. I mean, maybe they'll win with more, but the incumbent during the last cycle, I believe, had 35 or 40% of the vote, 35 or 40, which means 60%. 65% voted against him, and he's sitting on the council. So it's going to be crazy. It's going to be wacky. And I bet you, if you were to ask those candidates, probably behind closed doors, but a lot of them will say straight to your face, yeah, they wish they had ranked choice voting, because they want to be viable.
Another thing that ranked choice voting does is that, and it will do in the district, is that it will hold the leadership accountable, right? And it does this in any one party state or city in this case, right? So I've seen this in Australia as well. Usually we have a reasonably balanced government. We have, it's multicolored. We've got lots of parties thanks to ranked choice voting. But at times where it's slipped towards, one party dominance for a while, it's a relatively fast, the system reacts quite quickly to that, if a government becomes unaccountable. Now, you don't have that here in the US. So you've got lots of these one-party states, right? DC being one of them, Oklahoma, et cetera, lots of red and blue states. And what does that do is it creates an apparatus where nobody's held accountable, right? Because nobody wants to vote for the other party because of the ideological disposition of that state. But they don't want to waste their vote either, so you just keep voting in the same group again and again and again. So why would it hold people accountable? What it would do is it would create the conditions by which independents, third parties become viable, right? It may not necessarily hand it over to them, but at least people are now considering them, and it changes that dynamic. In my native Australia, we still have major parties, right? Because they represent the interests of society. But those major parties are held accountable by independents and third parties. They're required to negotiate with them on a continuous basis. They're required to adopt policies on a continuous basis. The party I helped start in Australia, we negotiated with our Labor Party, the equivalent of the Democrats. They picked up some of our policies, right? Because they wanted to get that one vote, right? They didn't want that one vote to come to us. And we were happy to do that, right? Because we were able to easily influence policy on a federal level through that mechanism, and it wouldn't have been possible without ranked choice voting.
So we've talked about, the intersection of voting rights. We've talked about how it will affect representation, and we've talked about some other examples outside of the district. I'd like to hear a little bit on your take, and Rhyane would speak to this too if she was here, but I'd like to hear from you all. What do you all think about or feel about the urgency of ranked choice voting, and perhaps in conjunction with other voting rights issues and other issues that are going on in the district, or even outside the district?
I see ranked choice voting as one piece of the reform puzzle. It has immediate concrete benefits in the short term, and that's great, but it's also not the only thing that we need. There's no one reform that's going to save everything. I think with ranked choice voting, it does a very good job of electing the candidate that appeals to the most voters. That is, people who showed up and cast a vote. If we have barriers that prevent certain people from voting, like independents, ranked choice voting doesn't count those votes unless those people can show up and vote. And so it really is part of a reform package. It goes well with things that help increase turnout. It goes well with things like vote by mail, because if you're mailing in a ballot, you want to be able to have your backup choices, and you're probably filling out your ballot in front of Google, and so you can look up and learn a lot about these candidates. It goes well with a lot of different reforms. I think it should be at the top of the agenda. I think it should be one of the first ones we work on. I think that's why we're all here. Once we pass ranked choice voting, once politicians are more accountable to voters, it makes it easier to work on those other issues too. So that's where I see it fitting in.
Well, I've talked about the combination of the two, and of course I'm going to be selfish because I am one of those unaffiliated voters, an independent voter, and I love when we talk about having politicians, office holders be accountable to us. What I would love even more would be the ability to vote in the primary so that they are also accountable to me, and I would be part of that majority. So it's really that simple.
Just to add a point on the urgency of it, I mean, we're in a dark moment here. Let's be real, right? And a lot of people are just saying, well, there's no hope, I'm not going to vote, or reacting in different ways. Like, we need to urgently reform the system so that people can believe in it again. Right? I think it's a bit rich for us to say, well, you should go vote because it's important to do so, when people aren't being given a reason to do so at times. So when people say to me, I'm not going to vote, I'll say, well, exercise your power, right? Even if it's not a full democracy yet, right? We've got work to do, and come and work with me on this reform, right? We can get better. This is why this is the tool to get us there, or one of several tools to get us there.
I'm so glad that you mentioned, getting people to come and work on this issue. So, Vinay, you work for Rank the Vote, which does a lot of on-the-ground organizing for ranked choice voting. What are the most important things that you've learned about how communities first respond when you talk to them about ranked choice voting?
Sure. So on that, it depends who you're talking to, right? Some communities will simply they'll want to know how it works, right? So, and it's some people are told, oh, it's confusing, whatever, and my response to them is simple as that. Name your 3 favorite movies in order. They'll do it. Say, congratulations, you can ranked choice vote, right? So it's that simple. That's all a voter needs to do, is rank things in order, right? And we do that every day of our lives. So that's one group. There's other groups who want to know, how's this going to positively or negatively impact me as an individual or my community? And I think it's important that we acknowledge and work through those concerns. Now, we wouldn't be here if we didn't believe it would positively impact all the communities the majority of communities in this country. And the third group is those who say, and this is an interesting group, who will be like, what's the point in reforming the system? The system is broken. There's no point voting anyway, right? And now, at first it's more like, we're talking about reforming a system, but we need to meet people where they're at, right? And so what I think is important is to acknowledge why people have lost faith in the system. I think there are very legitimate reasons why many people have lost faith in the system. We need to acknowledge it and understand it and say, and walk people through, well, what are the consequences of not voting, right? Just so people are clear on that. But then say, well, what if you did exercise the power you have and work to fix it? And what if there was a solution, right? And so I think it's not just important for us to talk about the rational case for ranked choice voting, right? It is a sensible reform. But we also need to understand people's fears, why they're devastated by this system, and I think show that this is a tool for something to give people hope, right? There is hope for this system, and I think ranked choice voting is part of that hope. We can build a better system.
Great. Well, keeping the conversation going, and we've talked a lot about open primaries and independent voters. Lisa, can you explain a little bit more, or even reiterate why is it so important to combine those issues, perhaps maybe with an example from the district?
Yeah, it's really important, first of all, because we talk a good game about democracy, right? And we talk about everyone has the right to vote. And how did we get here that we believe as a country everyone has the right to vote? Some would say, that started with, the Constitution. Well, we know that the Constitution has been amended, and I talk about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. There are people who literally gave their lives so that everyone, including Black people who have been disenfranchised since the beginning of coming to this country, that we have the right to vote. And so, when you're looking at the history of the Voting Rights Act and you're looking at Dr. King's activism, you'll note that he was not always welcome in communities where the Democratic Party was in majority, because he valued those who didn't necessarily align with the Democratic Party, those who were independents. And you'll hear about that if you get really in the weeds about what happened when he went to Chicago. And so it's really important. And again, taxpayer-funded elections. These are not private caucuses. If the Democratic Party or the Republican Party were paying for their own caucuses, I have nothing to say about it. It's their party. I'm not invited. I'm a taxpayer and I am paying for these primary elections. I should be allowed to vote. Any registered voter should be allowed to vote. And so this is, when we combine this with this tool of that's going to give us accountability, ranked choice voting will give us politicians, elect politicians who are there because the majority of voters have put them there. We have more people participating in the process, and we have politicians who've been elected by a majority of us. And that is very, very powerful. And in DC, you'll hear some of our electeds talk about those of us who live east of the river in wards 7 and 8, as if we don't matter, as if we don't know what the issues are, as if we don't care. Well, we matter, we're intelligent, and we care. And maybe the reason that folks in Ward 8 aren't voting is because they've been abandoned by the politicians who have been put in again and again and again by a small majority of people who are running the parties. So I really invite you to think about, what happens in a community when people start to understand that if they participate and if they elect people who are put there by a majority of voters, what happens to that community? That community starts getting legislation that benefits them, not just the minority. And that's a really important thing. And it's a really important thing that I talk about because I live in Ward 7, and Ward 7 is majority Black. And I have been told and what Rhyane said is so true, skin folk ain't always kin folk. I have been told by Black political leaders in this city that because I'm over the age of 60 and because I live east of the river, that I can't rank. You're too confused. You wouldn't know how to do it. That's such bullshit. I get dressed every day, right? I go in my closet and I choose, I think I'll wear that, or I think I'll wear every day. As adults, we do this every day. So the narrative that we're fighting against, especially in communities east of the river, is very real. And it wouldn't be such a hard push against it if it weren't that someone was worried about losing their power. And again, I will say, whether it's DC or it's Oklahoma, depending upon the majority party, if they're in there and they're embedded and they're comfortable, they don't want anything to rock the boat. And I am all about rocking the boat. So it's my story and I'm sticking to it.
So I have one next question for you all. In what ways can people get involved in the DC campaign?
Who's a DC voter? Anyone registered here in the district? A couple, but not very many. Well, Lisa's campaign. Vinay's campaign manager right now.
Yeah, we actually can use help from folks who, whether or not you are registered to vote in DC. If you're registered to vote in DC, we would love you to become a petition circulator. If you are not registered to vote in DC, you could do that as well. There are a couple of other steps, going to the Board of Elections or what have you. But we participate in community events when we need people to just hand out flyers. We march in parades and we want people to join in. I mean, just to have the movement and the excitement. Come to events, learn more. I say the best thing you can do is learn more about opening the primaries to independents, learn more about ranked choice voting, and then show up at a community event, where, if it's here in this ward or somewhere else, so that you can be the person in the audience asking a question, making people answer specific questions, especially those who have objections. And call people out and learn more. So that's what I say from my perspective. Vinay probably has a different perspective.
No, well, just more to add to that. So if you're a registered DC voter, before you leave, we have one of our petition circulators, Matt, at the back. Please sign our petition. Thank you, Matt. We need to get 30,000 signatures. We're looking to get that by July. So please sign on to that, where, as Lisa mentioned, you can become a petition circulator. We strongly encourage that. We need all the help we can get. So please do that. To actually become a volunteer, Matt has a QR code with him on the, and you can take one of the flyers with you, but you can sign up to be either to be a petition circulator yourself. That is the most valuable thing right now, but there are many, many ways you can be involved in the campaign. So one thing I'd like you to think about is that, like, our goal in this campaign is to talk to every voter, right? We want to talk to everyone. And it's not a big city, it's doable, right? So every single one of you is a network, right? Between your friends, your family, where you work, and their friends, their family, where they work, right? So what we want to do is, if we want to aggressively talk to every single person you know, right? And so you can help us do that, right? We can, there are organizations that you know that would love to have us come and speak about it. If you want to speak about ranked choice voting yourself, we can go through training, right? And you can become a presenter, right? There are so many options, right, to be involved. If we do that, we can get in front of every single voter. We can make this like a historic campaign in the city. So please, would love to have you involved in making this happen.
One more. So a huge priority, of course, is work on this campaign, because we're trying to get it on the ballot for this November and then win, of course. But there's other stuff you can do also. Is anyone involved in the student government here at the university? No. Well, one, there we go. Well, consider getting involved. A great path to become nerds like us is to start with student government. But consider if ranked choice voting feels like a good idea to you all, consider whether you might want to try to implement it here for student elections. There are about 100 colleges and universities around the country who do ranked choice voting for student or faculty elections. And Howard is not on our list right now, and you could be. So that's one path. And then I'm sure a lot of you are from other states and just here for school. And so as you're going back home, there are campaigns or there are organizations working on this in almost every state. And so you can look that up if you're home for the summer or if you're moving for a job after graduation. Keep an eye out for these ranked choice voting organizations. They're in most of the states and would love to have your help.
Yeah, and actually just on that, this year nationwide is going to be the biggest year ever for ranked choice voting. So if you know people in other states, I think we're tracking, do you know the exact stat? Where there's multiple states that are potentially voting on it this year, and somewhere between 20 to 30 cities might be voting to adopt it this year. So it's going to be an enormous year for it. So if you know people out of state as well, please get them involved. The organization I work with, Rank the Vote, we have grassroots movements in at least over half the country, right? So please, no matter what, if you try and get everyone in your network involved, there's always a way.
And stick around for the reception afterwards. We've got some swag and snacks, and we want to chat with you. We want to hear what's on your mind and answer any questions you have.
So thank you all to all the panelists for being here, for the lovely conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you all for being here and joining us today. Before you get up and get some more food and whatnot, if you could, there's a brochure that is on your seat. And if you could, on the back, I believe there's a QR code on the back. If you could scan it and just sign in. To say that you were here. We also do have a kind of like sign-in sheet paper one if you don't want to do it on your phone. That's Rank the Vote branded in the back. And if you would be so kind to, you don't have to do it all at once, sometime before you leave today, perhaps before you leave the reception, here is a giant QR code for a survey. So you can tell us, your thoughts about the event, about our panelists, topics that you want to hear about in the future, and different things like that. And if you want to get involved and have us contact you, we can also do that as well. So there's that QR code, this one Vinay mentioned as well in the back.
It's room full of QR codes.
Yeah, lots of QR codes. But yeah, with that, please stay for the reception. We'll be here until 4, so it's a little less than an hour. Our panelists will be here. We have some staff from FairVote and whatnot, and we are excited to talk with you all. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.